Prigozhin dies in plane crash. 2 months after his mutiny against Russian army. Biden points finger at Putin. Prigozhin death mystery.
So 24th of June was when the Wagner forces under Yevgeny Prigozhin carried out a mutiny against the Russian forces. They marched towards Moscow. They were the ones who were fighting in Bakhmut and other parts of Ukraine. And suddenly they just turned around and attacked their own country. President Putin at that point of time had described it as a stab in the back. He said it's akin to treason. And by the 23rd of August, reports came in that Yevgeny Prigozhin had been killed in an air crash, barely 100 kilometers from Moscow. The Russian Civil Aviation Authority said Yevgeny Prigozhin was on the list of 10 passengers on board that jet that was flying from Moscow to St. Petersburg. According to preliminary information that came in, all 10 on board had died, including 3 crew members, the Russian government said. The crash comes just 2 months after Prigozhin launched a short-lived revolt, a rebellion seen at that point of time as a huge challenge to the Russian president's authority since he came to power. Now, is Prigozhin actually dead, or are there multiple Prigozhins floating around? Now, India Today will try and get you some details of this. Xenia Kondrateva is a senior journalist. She's an investigative war reporter who joins us on the show. She joins us from Russia. We also have with us Major General Sanjay Meston, someone who keeps a keen eye on developments in the region. Abhishek Bhalla, our defense editor, also with us on this broadcast. But before that, we show you this report.
I don't know for a fact what happened, but I'm not surprised.
Do you believe?
There's not much that happens when Russia is not behind, but I don't know enough to know the answer.
But yes, would Putin have done this? Well, he has certainly the Russian security forces have a history of poisoning people at home and abroad, and political opponents or people that Mr. Putin has previously called traitors. And he has, of course, called Prigozhin, well, he's called some of them traitors. But, you know, why did it take so long? Your original question.
I want to bring in Xenia Kondrateva into this conversation first. Xenia, is it confirmed that Yevgeny Prigozhin was on board that flight and that he's dead?
Hi, thanks for having me. So very important, it is not confirmed that he is dead. What is confirmed and what the Russian aviation authorities have confirmed yesterday night, that he was among the passenger in the passenger list. This is as much as we know. So whether it automatically means that he was in the crashed plane, we cannot state this at the moment, even though most of the media, especially internationally, I think Russian media has been a bit careful about reporting this. But internationally, we've seen the headlines that he was dead even before this statement from Russian authorities came out.
How powerful was Yevgeny Prigozhin before the June 24 revolt and after the June 24 revolt? President Putin had said he was stabbed in the back and that this was akin to treason, exiled him to Belarus, and yet Prigozhin was back and he was flying pretty frequently between Moscow and St. Petersburg. Many argued he was the second most powerful man in Russia after President Putin. Was that actually true, Xenia?
Well, as a Russian citizen, as a person, and as a journalist living and reporting on Russia, I would say this is a big exaggeration. Whether you mean powerful in military terms, we have seen over the past 1.5 years what his private military company has done on the front line, if we just speak about the facts. So I think they were efficient, they're all ex-military, they were well equipped. So in that sense, he was powerful, but he had no political, I mean, officially, we don't know about his political backing. Probably it has been there. And maybe, as many analysts in Russia said, especially in the past 6 months, that he had some political ambitions. But it ends there. He had no political tools or anything, actively playing. So I would say that's a big exaggeration. But yes, you have to also consider that there is no single understanding of what has happened 2 months back when Prigozhin launched that so-called mutiny, whether it was staged, as many believe, or it was an actual revolt that obviously angered the president and the elites in Kremlin. And it was named a stab in the back, which is understandable because the country is an ongoing conflict. And
Yes.
as Vladimir Putin, if I rightly remember, stated that time that doing this at the time when the country is going through something like this is a stab in the back. That what his argument was.
Yes.
So there is no single defined opinion. It's still as much as the plane crash is a controversy and a big
Okay.
speculation right now. The same goes for the mutiny itself. What this actually was, even 2 months later.
Abhishek, you've been looking at international media very closely. You've been looking at Russian media reports. You've also been speaking to your sources. What have you been able to pick up so far?
Something that is of immense significance, Gaurav, is the fact that there's been a lot of analysis that I've gone through and read, that there was a bit of a confrontation going on between the defense forces of Russia, where they were trying to take on the Wagner group, and they were trying to make sure that they get completely neutralized. And from the Wagner group, there were counter-offensives made. Now, all this wasn't really, I think, in the public domain unless this happened. But a lot of analysis has been done since this incident has happened. Maybe Genia can also shed more light on what has been happening between the Russian defense forces and the Wagner group for the last 2 months. What we heard earlier was that they were given two options, either to move to Belarus or to join the forces. Now, how many actually joined the forces? How many went to Belarus? What was the status of these soldiers, quote unquote? It would be important to know.
General, what's your appreciation? General Meston, what's your appreciation of the situation? Initial information seems to indicate that when you look at the passenger manifest, 7 passengers, 3 crew, one of the 7 was Yevgeny Prigozhin. That name was there. Even his second in command's name was there. And they are both amongst the 7 of the 10 dead.
Gaurav, good afternoon. As even brought out by the previous 2 speakers, the Russian television, which I've been watching, has actually confirmed that his name was there, and Zini has also confirmed that his name was there on the manifest. And apparently he was probably there in the flight. Now, there are some reasons which substantiate that. Number one, there are a lot of unconfirmed reports that yesterday only Prigozhin and his team, even Dmitry Utkin, probably were having a meeting at the Defense Ministry. That is confirmed. Second is that President Putin was celebrating the Victory Day parade at the Battle of Kirks. In Kirks, he was there.
Yes.
And third, very significant aspect is that General Armageddon, we know he was appointed. And yesterday himself, that is Servokin, General Sergei Servokin, he has been officially removed.
Yes.
So 3 things major have happened yesterday, and fourth is the air crash.
Yes.
Now, there seems to be some kind of a synchronization on this date. And actually, the mutiny also started on 23rd June.
That's right.
And 24th it finished. So this 23rd, 5 events, one is of course happened 2 months back, and 4 events have got a little linkage. Now, what has happened, my personal feeling is that probably he was there in that aircraft.
Okay, stay with me for a moment. That's a very interesting point that you draw, especially about General Survokin. General Sergei Survokin was someone who was seen as one of the strongest Air Force generals of Russia, someone who was considered very close to Yevgeny Prigozhin, someone who was brought in to carry out those massive aerial bombings of Ukraine in this war that's been on since the 24th of February 2022. We'll talk to Xenia about these aspects in greater detail. But let's for a moment talk about Yevgeny Prigozhin, believed to be deceased after this air crash. He headed the Wagner group. Now, apparently, he's dead. His second in command, they're both dead. So what happens to the Wagner forces? The Wagner forces have been active in Ukraine since 2014. And this mercenary group comprises some of the best commandos and special forces and soldiers of the Russian armed forces. They've operated not just in Ukraine, but also in parts of Africa. Incidentally, they're believed to now be playing a bigger role in Africa. They've played a role in Central Asia. They've played a role in Latin America. The fighters of this private army are hailed by many as heroes of Russia who are fighting against all odds. They were seen as fighting against all odds in that battle of Bakhmut and also winning that battle. We bring you this report.
Prigozhin is one of Russia's richest and most influential men, but he's had humble roots. He started his business initially as modest hot dog seller in St. Petersburg. He eventually opened a series of chic restaurants, including one on a floating boat called New Island, that became a favorite of another St. Petersburg native, Vladimir Putin. Lucrative state contracts followed, and with time, Prigozhin's activities expanded. For instance, in 2012, he won more than 10.5 billion rubles of contracts to provide food to Moscow's schools. However, despite the riches that the food industry brought him, in 2014, he diversified into a new sector, the private military. It is unclear whose idea was it from the Wagner group, whether Putin asked Prigozhin for help or the latter pitched it to him. Either way, the group came into existence during Russia's 2014 invasion of Crimea. Wagner's success in these early operations led to the group's swift expansion. Wagner became a proxy army for Putin. Subsequently, Wagner Group began to be involved in almost every conflict in the world where Russia had a role to play, from civil wars in Sudan and Libya in Africa to Venezuela during the presidential crisis of 2019. When Putin decided to invade Ukraine in 2022, Prigozhin and his Wagner Group were at the heart of Russian operations. The group benefited Russia significantly. It captured the key regions of Soledar and Bakhmut for Russia. White House officials estimate the private mercenary group employs around 50,000 soldiers. Of those, 40,000 are thought to be convicts. Bureau Report, India Today.
Xenia, there are some who say that this is all a part of a very organized campaign. President Putin never forgives, President Putin never forgets. And if he was stabbed in the back, if he saw this as treason, within 2 months from 24th of June to 24th of August, he's ensured that this gentleman has been neutralized, Prigozhin, and General Surovikin has been axed. What can you tell us about that, Xenia?
Of course, the fact that General Surovikin was, replaced, that's an important connection. But again, this is as much as we know, these are all rumors that they were connected, that there was some backing from Surovikin. These are, let's keep it as one version because there would be many more. It was when the mutiny happened, there were a lot of believers that even the mutiny itself was staged because it was really a very good point for the West to see Russian president weakened by the mutiny, by what Prigozhin has done. But we don't know for sure whether the mutiny itself wasn't staged. And the same goes for the plane crash, because I would just remind the audience that it's, I think, the third time that Prigozhin is dying in a plane crash. First time was in 2019 in Congo. And then I think he was reported killed in Luhansk last year. So, and just let me, put it that way: a plane crash is a perfect way to disappear. I mean, it from even the Indian history. Any official figures, any politicians dying in a plane crash, there's always a mystery, because you literally cannot identify. So there is a lot at play, and I wouldn't see, at least for now, I would keep all the options open.
Very interesting you should say that, and let me bring in General Meston before I bring in Abhishek into this conversation once again. General Meston, it's very convenient if Prigozhin wants to just disappear. The international heat is on the Wagner forces. They were supposed to be operating out of Belarus, supposed to launch another offensive from there. They're also supposed to be playing a much bigger role in Africa. Now that the great game has started in Africa all over again, Prigozhin has very conveniently disappeared. Slowly, international scrutiny would be lost, and he could reappear at a place and time of his choosing and continue to operate under the radar, General Meston.
Yeah, Gaurav, all options actually are possible because some things will always continue to remain a mystery. And we all know that Prigozhin had many faces and rather many passports also. So firstly, was he on the plane? Yes, the manifest states he was there. But actually, was he there? That always will remain a question mark, as brought out by Xenia. But now, where is he? If he is alive, obviously the West would be concerned, because recently the coup in Niger, in Africa, yes, West Africa, and also in Mali, a lot of his Wagner supporters and rather Wagner fighters are there who have been fighting extremely well there. Second concern was also the Wagner forces were also concentrating towards northwest of Belarus, which actually was the border with Poland. And also it is very close to Kaliningrad Oblast, which is connectivity between Russia and Belarus. So that's another thing, that Suwalki Gap, which is I think about 45 miles. So all these things, if we keep into mind, firstly, is he dead? Will he reappear? Will perhaps never be known. Okay. Of course, the Russian media has confirmed that 8 bodies have been retrieved. Even yes, balance 2 have been retrieved. Whether they'll conduct the DNA test, how genuine would be the DNA test, all these question marks will remain. Now, let's presume 2 options. One is yes, if he's alive, and if he's killed. If he's killed, the biggest question will be what happens to the Wagner cadres. Because, see, men without a leader, and both the leaders have gone. Yes. Dmitry Utkin has also gone, and they were very influential. And Utkin was rather instrumental in raising, and he had an army background.
Yes, so co-founder of the Wagner forces. Go on, sir.
Yeah, so both leaders having gone. Now, what will happen about these, I would say, Wagner forces who are in Belarus, who are in Africa and Latin America? So this is a $1 million question, and who will control them? Can they find a suitable replacement? And also now Western countries, perhaps, including Ukraine, may be looking forward to somehow get their cadres toward their side, and they will play the card. In fact, one of the reports of the Telegraph of the Wagner group has stated that he has been killed by the Russian military forces.
Okay, so Abhishek, when you look at this situation, the scenario as far as the Wagner forces is concerned, they were expected to play a much bigger and a crucial role in Africa, especially now. But as Xenia also correctly points out, Prigozhin has been allegedly killed or reportedly killed in air crashes even in the past.
Well, that's a very important point that Xenia has brought out on our broadcast here. If he were to be alive, I mean, that's one option that hasn't been discussed so much internationally. If he were to be alive, what's the future of the Wagner group? I mean, that's the question we need to probably put it in another way, because everybody is discussing what if he's dead, but what if he's alive? As General Meston was saying, if he's alive, can he control the Wagner group, probably in disguise, in another avatar? So these are some aspects of this story that are not going to die, and we are probably going to hear much more about the Wagner group and Prigozhin, whether he's dead or not.
So what happens, Xenia, in your appreciation, and since you're a war correspondent, you've seen war up front and close, what happens to Wagner forces if both Prigozhin and Dmitry Utkin, the second in command of the Wagner forces or the co-founder of Wagner forces, are both feared or believed to be killed in this air crash?
Oh, firstly, I wouldn't call myself a war correspondent, even though I reported from the war zone. I try to stick to the people's aspects of the war and not on the war aspect. But what I know from some of sources in the private military companies that I have, fighters on the front line, and what I see in the public domain in the various Telegram channels, first of all, obviously, the Wagner group would have, as a private military company, would have a plan in case Mr. Prigozhin is killed or the commanders are killed. How influential he was amongst his own fighters is another question, because he is a businessman, first of all, and let's not forget that he built a business empire, and PMC is another business, if you look at it from that perspective. So whether it was him, he is not a military man, but his commanders and those, at least as far as I know, those who fought in the Wagner, they're all ex-military. What I've been told by some who joined or wanted to join, was looking to join Wagner Group, is that, first of all, you get paid. And secondly, there is no bureaucracy, because if you look at the official army, I mean, that goes for any army of the world. It's a huge machine. So there is hierarchy and there is some bureaucracy. So I think PMC Wagner was, or probably any other private military company, was different in that sense. And this is what probably attracted many.
Are the Wagner forces now expected to play a bigger role in Africa? Do they have a bigger role there in Africa and not as much in Ukraine? If truly Prigozhin and Dmitry Utkin are both no longer alive after that crash?
There is no reliable data to really back up any of these arguments. We don't know how many of them are in Africa, but at least what we see in the public, that they had already played a huge role. And I mean, you see yourself what's happening in Africa right now. This is a crucial moment. So, and I think for some of the forces playing out in Africa, having Prigozhin out of Africa would be just a perfect scenario.
And
so I think
as far as Russia is concerned, has President Putin been able to send across that very firm message across the country? Nobody dare take him on. Anyone who does is no longer alive.
I don't think the majority of Russia, President Putin enjoys support in Russia. How different the actual figure from the official figures that we have, over 70%, is a question. But I would say that generally the masses, the society, they support him. They support him as a strong leader, and not just because of what's happening in the recent past, but he has ended the war in Chechnya. People, not the young people, but people 40 plus would really appreciate that. The kind of the order has been established in this country after he came to power. So let's not underestimate it. Russians generally, I would say, because of the kind of media coverage we have in Russia, have not seen him as a tyrant. That's what he is portrayed in the West. There is a very different perception about him in Russia. I think that's important.
Okay, General Meston, has President Putin been able to re-establish his authority as the general in command of a country called Russia?
Yeah, absolutely. He has been able to reassert his authority. There is no doubt. And going back to the so-called mutiny, see, one thing is very clear. Wagner forces had also killed some of the Russian pilots, military
Yes,
pilots. I think the numbers were about
13,
15. Even
15.
attack captors were shot down.
Yes.
So President Putin pardoning him, giving him a getaway to Belarus, and no trial to be done, no charge sheet. So I think he had given in to some extent. But I'm quite sure President Putin, you even highlighted, is a man who will never forgive and never forget and forgive. So anyway, with this incident, whether he is dead or not, but something has happened. He and sacking of General Servokin, I think, he's conveyed a very clear message. He is not worried about the common man. He is actually worried about people within the armed forces.
Hierarchy, yes.
Some people have tended to show a mutinous tendency. Even some people had a little linkage towards Prigozhin. So that message has gone that whoever will try anything against President Putin, obviously he will be taken care of in some way or the other. But his authority has been reinforced. He is very firm and decisive, there's no doubt. And this is actually going to be a very strong message even to the West and to perhaps Ukraine. And I think one of the reasons was, see, he was celebrating the Battle of Kursk.
Yes.
This was a major battle, which was again, this was
Against
a counter-offensive.
Nazi Germany, yeah.
Yeah, counter-offensive. So considering the success in the counter-offensive, and that too on 23rd of August, I think it is sending some message. Generally, presidents will not go for an isolated battle. For him, the National Day or the National Military Days are more important.
Very interesting. No, and then the president's body language, we're told, is also completely different from what it was in June, on the 24th of June. But Abhishek, in the end, this does not impact Russia's war on Ukraine. Russia has been very firm on that.
Well, certainly, I mean, I don't think it's going to have much of a bearing on the developments in eastern Ukraine and parts of Ukraine which are in control of the Russians now. But this mystery around Prigozhin will remain. I mean, that's what I feel, that on one side there will be a narrative that this is a punitive action as far as the Russian leadership is concerned, because they took on their army. And on the other hand, even if there's no clarity whether he's dead or not, it will still give some leeway to the Russian leadership in setting up this narrative that we've dealt with him.
And Xenia, how is this war being perceived now after so many months, after a year and a half in Russia? How is Russia's war against Ukraine proceeding in view of Russians?
As before, we have more men going to the front line, I believe. But as much as before, the society is quite divided. There are those people who support whatever Russia is doing in Ukraine, the special operation as it's called. There are those sections who do not support. So nothing much changes on this front. But I would say that going back to Prigozhin and the mutiny, I've heard a lot of supporters of Prigozhin, those who were supporting him when his troops were fighting, especially in Bakhmut.
Yeah.
After the mutiny, they turned, towards, let's say, towards Vladimir Putin's side, supporting the argument that, yes, that was a stab in the back. And I think that's quite an important shift in the mind of a lot of people.
I will let that be the last word, at least on this part of the show. Xenia Kondrateva in Russia, Major General Sanjay Meston and Abhishek Bhalla for joining me here on this India Today special broadcast. Many thanks. We will track this story very closely. Is Yevgeny Prigozhin actually dead? Once considered the second most powerful man in Russia. Could he have challenged the Russian President Vladimir Putin? And has President Putin actually been able to send across that message, with reports that Prigozhin and his deputy have both been killed in an air crash 100 kilometers north of Moscow? We'll track that story very, very closely. I leave you with this report.
Russian authorities say mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin was listed as a path after the mutiny he led that brought the country into a crisis. This unverified video from a Russian news outlet is said to show the moment of the crash. Reuters used satellite and street view images to confirm the clip's location, but could not immediately confirm that Prigozhin was physically on board the aircraft. According to Russian authorities, the crash happened Wednesday evening north of Moscow, leaving no survivors. 10 people were on board the plane heading from Moscow to St. Petersburg, 3 of them crew members. State media is reporting that 8 bodies were initially found at the crash site, with search and rescue operations underway. Data from online tracker FlightRadar24.com shows a plane heading northwest and then shortly after 6 p.m., suddenly disappearing. Prigozhin soared in prominence after Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year. The 62-year-old's fighters led the assault on the city of Bakhmut in the longest and bloodiest battle of the war. In June, he spearheaded a mutiny against Russia's top army brass. President Vladimir Putin said that move could have tipped the country into civil war. He was supposed to move to neighboring Belarus under an apparent deal to end the mutiny. U.S. President Joe Biden said he wasn't surprised to hear the news.
There's not much that happens in Russia that Putin's not behind, but I don't know enough to know the answer.
There was no immediate comment from Russia's defense ministry or the Kremlin.